pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we will now open public comment, which will remain open for 30 minutes at 6:05 p.m. Anyone here to present public comment? Okay, we'll keep it running and we'll continue through our agenda. On to approval of the minutes from our last meeting, November 1st, which already feels like ages ago.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented for November 1st, 2022.
Awesome.
Thank you.
They're
Any
tied to a tie.
questions or discussion? Great, Rhonda, how do you want to do the vote?
I'll read it off. Well, if everybody's in agreement, you can just raise your hand if there's anybody that is opposed or needs to abstain because they weren't present.
Okay.
I don't remember if I was
If you click on the minutes, it shows
I looked
attendance
at
on the
that.
top.
I didn't see the attendance on the top, though.
Jason, Anthony,
Absent,
Jill.
you were absent.
Oh, okay. It's at the very top.
Barbara and Renee were absent.
Okay.
Christina and Patrick were absent, and Jim was absent.
We were absent.
That's what it says.
I guess she doesn't say.
You can second it.
I'll
Yeah, you were here.
So maybe how many people were abstaining?
I'm abstaining.
Okay, that might be an easier number. So Jim is
Hi,
an
Tony.
abstention. Patrick, Christina, and Renee and Barbara.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And everybody else is a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, 4A, we're going to move on to presentation on core programs and assessment tools. Great. Are you to the screen?
Yes, unfortunately we are going to do the screen, so
That's great.
however you're comfortable.
Just want to be able to
And
see.
apologies, we have a curriculum team that's here to present. We got Lauren DeConstant, we got Lauren Marsden, we got
Good.
Michelle Witt. We're missing 3 members of our team tonight due to weather-related issues.
No.
Becca's doing the spelling bee in Northampton, and Roy and Amy Middleton are out weather-related, family issues. So, anyways, don't ask very hard questions for Northampton or Hampton Falls. Everybody else we can answer. So we were asked to put together a presentation on programming and assessment updates. The purpose of this presentation is to give you guys kind of a broad picture of the programs we use to enhance our curriculum and the assessments we use to measure and the data we use to increase learning for our students. Okay? That works. You guys probably are pretty familiar with kind of the narrative of this slide. Throughout the last number of years, we've gone through a process of competency development, SAU-wide, K through 12. We've had teachers sit down in collaborative groups, pulling from MGSS Science, Common Core, World Language Standards, Science Standards, etc., social emotional standards, and put together unified competencies and standards in an architecture that fits for SAU 21. That process was done for all the sending schools as well as Winnicott High School. Powered the standard development. So you guys are aware, I think I've given the grade book presentation too many times, but you guys have hopefully seen the back end of the grade book. With regard to a given class, if a class has a number of competencies, each one of those competencies has power standards associated with it. Those were negotiated by teachers and agreed on by teachers because they reflect what we do and what we care about in our curriculum. Okay? Obviously, the cares and habits of learning was dovetailed into that, folded into that. They're predicated on the work study practices that New Hampshire has adopted. And while we have agreed on the terms and the rubrics, the rollouts, as you're going to see, vary across the SAU. And of course, we all adhere to the roll-up settings for reporting. That just means that the power standards, the assessments given related to the power standards, inform a student's competency grade. How we use district level data. Obviously, data is very important for us in terms of budgeting. But specifically for my world, our world is evaluating programs and curriculum, making sure they're doing what they say they're doing, making sure we're showing student growth. They identify PD needs, professional development needs for our staff. It's good communication piece for the community, but also for the boards, and informing any improvement plans that we need to budget for and future initiatives. Okay, so that's kind of the driving force on how we use data around curriculum. So I'll dig into programming, start with early literacy programming, and I thought this was very telling in terms of kind of how, oh yeah, I snuck this slide in, so you're not going to see this on the presentation, but you can always Google it. Scarborough's reading rope. It gives a great visual of how we use balanced literacy approach in our early childhood classes. Obviously, you have two kind of big threads on that reading rope, right? There's the decoding piece, the sight recognition, the phonological awareness. That's knowing what you're reading on the page, right? And then the bottom thread is understanding and actualizing what you're reading on the page. So it has to do with vocabulary knowledge, background knowledge, language structures, literacy, and verbal reasoning, okay? So it's understanding what's on the page and then putting it into action. So that's kind of how, those are the best practices on early childhood literacy, and that's kind of how we frame our curriculum and our programs around that. So let me show you, this is the result of that. So as you can see over on the right-hand side, all of our core literacy programming has 4 distinct features: phonemic awareness, phonics instruction, teacher-led reading and writing, and independent learning, okay? So those best practices, those pieces of the thread are in all of our programs that we've adopted across our schools. As you can see, however, there is some flexibility in how those schools adopt programs. And I'm sorry, because I'm learning the lesson about the green on the black on the green. It's a lot clearer on my screen. But these are some of the programs that kind of serve that purpose at our different schools. And I can kind of dish it to either Lauren or Michelle to kind of bring us through maybe some examples of how it's used at Barnard or Seabrook.
Sure. So at Barnard School, actually we do a lot of similar things at Barnard and Seabrook. We do Heggerty phonemic awareness, which is just teaching students those phonemic sounds and matching, hearing the sounds and segmenting the sounds, deleting sounds, and just playing with sounds to get that foundational understanding of the English language. We use a program called Foundations, which is a phonics program in grades K to 3. And then as they move up into 4th grade, they do a program called Words Their Way, which focuses on vocabulary and word parts and in bigger words, just progresses. And then in K to 5, we do reading and writing workshop, K to 8 reading and writing workshop, which is a balanced literacy approach to reading and writing, which, as Dave pointed out, more focuses on putting all the pieces together for reading. And then, yeah, that's it.
In a nutshell. For Seabrook, just as Michelle was saying, a lot of similarities across the schools, which is nice. A couple of differences. We use the Heggerty in the early K1 as a similarity. Foundations we added this year with some training, and we have foundations now built into our schedule for all of our students K through 3, so that's similar across the districts. Our teachers use a guided reading program, which is kind of hooks into our assessment program called our benchmark assessment system for reading, where students one-on-one assess students' reading abilities, and then they group them in like ability groups, but then move those through those groups at flexible pacing, and it's embedded K through 5, so it's something that teachers have been trained in and years back, and we're implementing that in all the classrooms. And then similar to what Michelle said, we have also reading and writing workshop model, which is more of the comprehension and independent learning, where students can choose books that are of high interest, and then they can read those and confer with a teacher, and then talk with a partner, and it's built more on a reading writing model instruction for literacy. So it's similar to the braid where all the parts come together in the older grades. In the 4th and the 5th grade, you're moving away from your phonemic to more towards the comprehension. And so there's a gradual release of learning to read versus reading to learn. And so we kind of move through the grades, adding more comprehension as the students get older. And then we target our interventions for students that struggle with reading wherever those targets need to be on that progression. So it's kind of an overview.
And I think Northampton, has been covered, all their programs. The only thing I see that hasn't been addressed is the Open Court, which is another phonemic awareness program. But yeah, I hope you can see some of the through lines, right?
Yeah.
And that's the point. Creating those expectations for best practice while also providing some flexibility and professional development for what our teachers and what our kids need. Okay, same thing with core programming for math. Obviously, math is more of a sequential curriculum. We do have a number of different adoptions of math programming, but the fundamentals here are the Common Core state standards. They all adhere to those Common Core standards. They all have or incorporate direct instruction, differentiated access, and problem solving. For those of you guys who are interested in differentiation, that's changing, the content, the product, or the process that a student uses to solve a problem, right? So you mix it up based on student need and learning style.
Dave, can I?
Please, yeah.
With the different math programs, I know that we just implemented Eureka for everyone recently, right?
That was our third year.
Third,
Yep.
okay. Is there a reason why the schools are different if we're funneling into the same place? I mean, I know that the foundations of what they're learning is similar, clearly, but as far as getting kids to high school on the same plane, do you feel like there's any difference with that based on different programs?
Thank you for the question. There's such a desire to pull in that direction. Here's my answer. The adoption of a math program or any program for a teacher is their professional life, right? Believe me, they take it very seriously. They go through what their kiddos need. They go through the type of instruction that they feel comfortable with. The problem with kind of cramming one program across all of our SAU is it's a cultural shift, but B, my concern is teachers should want to live it and breathe it, and if they don't, you're not going to get it with fidelity, and you're not going to get it consistently across your school. It's been our experience that allowing those curriculum groups, those teachers to adopt a given program, with the caveat that they all have the same learning targets, has paid better dividends. Great question, and I share the sentiment. But that's where we are, right? And I can say this, the curriculum adoption processes that I've seen in the 3 years that I've been here have been authentic and have involved teacher voice, and that means a lot to individual schools.
Dave, what are the different, you said Seabrook's had that for 3 years, what are the different years? Because I know this is brand new for LAS.
Right, LAS is new on Bridges.
Yep.
What did you guys have before Bridges? Everyday math,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
And Northampton has had,
I think it's their third year.
its third year. Sorry,
Okay.
Becca's not here.
For Bridges as well.
Yeah, we had Bridges.
So do we do an evaluation at the high school level a few years in to see if the different curriculums are delivering
Yeah.
as
There's one
expected or consistently?
So there are a lot of indicators that kind of bleed into that. Yes, we look at enrollment, we look at course GPA, like how students are doing freshman year.
Yeah.
We look at trajectory. But at the end of the day, the recommendation process from 8th to 9th grade is competency based. So they are looking at the expectations for 8th grade math and some of algebra, frankly, and placing students that way in terms of just a metric of how students are performing. That diagnostic process, that you're asking about, I think happens more in the individual sending school
Yeah.
itself. And yeah, I would guess, I mean, it's a natural kind of process. I'd say 3 to 5 years, you start looking for a new program. When the teachers start getting itchy and the students start getting itchy. That said, there's a lot to be said for continuity in programming. I'm sure Lauren can brag about the Eureka adoption, but they're seeing some really great gains around some
Yeah.
consistent programming on Eureka.
And the Eureka is a K through 8, so that was important for our teachers to be able to feel like they could have conversations across our 2 buildings, because that was one of our district goals, was to have that communication open. So when we chose that, that was one of the key elements to it when the teachers took a look at it. They liked the K through 8, which has had dividends, because our teachers this year were able to visit each other's classrooms across the buildings and watch lessons being taught from an 8th grade to a 2nd grade, so on. So we're just opening up. This is our 3rd year, so there's so much more to discover, but I think that's one of the benefits, is having similar conversation.
Thank you.
Did you want to speak to iReady at all? Or?
Sure. About that? Well, I think the
No, just
continuity
about-
from K to 8,
Yeah.
yes, and I think it's also, when it's K to 8, it's better because you're using the same language, same vocabulary, and you can extend it, just like a through line from K to 8.
What are we doing Northampton doing 6 to 8? Because it's only and I know Becca's not here, so.
Yeah, I think it's frankly, it's less of an emphasis on a program and more teacher unit. So, Drew will get together with his team and put together a math unit around a given competency.
And I know you just answered this, but are you doing any sort of check-in and evaluation with the Winnacunnet teachers to really get a handle on how prepared the kids are from each district coming into that freshman math? Are they being placed properly? Are they, do you have some kids sitting from Seabrook and sitting next to Northampton that are placed at the same place but aren't at the same spot?
Thank you for the question, and yes, we feverishly go over that information every year. And I'll add to that, it's a two-way direction, right? So there's a lot of communication from the sending schools coming up into Winnacunnet in terms of placement, in terms of how kids are doing, et cetera. But then there's the reverse as well. So what we're able to do is we're able to pull enrollment and grades, I guess for lack of better terms, on that freshman year, and then send them back to the sending school teachers to say, oh wait, Susie, I placed Susie here, she's not doing so well, what's going on? Or if there's a given school that's having some issues in terms of placements, we're right on it. We cherish that information.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a question. Please go ahead.
Yep.
So you're assessing students. Are you assessing the teachers as well at the sending school? Because I know specifically of an issue at Lincoln Ackerman about 5 years ago where a teacher was hired who really wasn't a math teacher. And there were some students coming in. So I wonder about that.
Go ahead, or I'm happy to jump in. That really speaks more to the evaluation process, which is separate from this conversation, but certainly I think gaps in instructional achievement are something that we notice, and if that is a contributing factor, that's something our administrators are working to address.
So two quick examples. One is, yes, I'm aware of that scenario, and I'm aware of the kind of the resources that Winnacunnet wrapped around that situation in terms, we knew it. Right off the bat, we knew students were missing X, Y, and Z. And Winnacunnet did a good job, and I agree with Meredith, wrapping supports around that. The second is aggregate numbers. So part of this process is looking at how students are enrolling and which districts they're from and which courses they're going into. And we're able to make changes at the 7th, 8th grade team level. Example being next year, hopefully at Seabrook, that are going to support our students moving into not only the pre-algebra, but also the algebra ranks and the geometry.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great questions. Yeah.
Do we know what SAU 90 uses?
In terms of math program, I don't know off the top of my head. I know they use STAR assessments, and we can get that data.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You? Do you?
Different school.
Okay. So, for another time, we'll answer that. And if we're okay with math, I'll move on. I know it's a long agenda, so I want to move as quickly as I can. I want to put our finger on science and social studies integration. So right now we are reporting in grades 5/6 through 12 in social studies and in science. However, what we'd like to do, we have two specific goals. One with social studies is integrating the C3, which is college, career, and civic life. It's just the term for C3 framework, into the lower grades for social studies. Right now, we don't see that being reported on a quote-unquote report card. However, the purpose of integration is to get those standards involved in the class, and we can do that through professional development. Over on the left-hand side, science, we do have formal plans to start reporting on that. So this summer, our grades 3 through 8 teachers are participating in SAU-wide NGSX training, which is basically the adoption of NGSS standards. But it's also in how they teach those given standards. It's way too much for this meeting, but the way they go after it in that early science is to, I'm gonna get the word, phenomenological approach. So it's real problem solving, and it's in line with our QPAs, and it's in line with competency-based. But it's a really great model, and it's peer-reviewed, and it's collaborative. So we do have that plan this summer with the adoption and reporting coming in next fall. So we'll leave that there. Okay, we don't need to dwell on this. You've heard the CARES and Habits of Learning presentation before. We do have those adopted rubrics. We do have a rollout plan in each one of our schools, and we're all doing it in a way that makes sense for our community and our kids. Any specifics that we wanted to share on this?
I think we've rolled it out at our school, at Barnard School, and it's become a really important part of the reflection process. Students set goals, weekly goals, and then they review them at the end of the week to set new goals or continue with those goals. It's a part of all of their academic work. There's always a part of what they're working on in their instruction. There's always a piece on their habits of learning that they're working on. So it's just they're constantly talking about it, reflecting, and setting goals.
Right.
For us at Seabrook, one of the things that we've really blended together is our social emotional learning curriculum, which is called Fly 5. It's an SEL curriculum, and it comes from Responsive Classroom. Their language is CARES, so it matched up really, really nicely for teachers. So they can use that in the morning meetings with students and then integrate it into the academics for the CARES at the elementary. So that was this year that we've been training teachers a little at a time on that. And then in the middle school, the habits of learning are assessed across multiple disciplines. So each of the teachers in their discipline has taken one of the habits of learning and focused on it. And so at the end of the report card, the students have all of them, but from different disciplines. So it's kind of a creative way to kind of become proficient at a certain part of those habits, because there's several of them. So that was kind of how we rolled it out, and it's going. I think it's going well. We're hopefully going to be adding more goal setting and reflection, especially.
And somewhere I know Becca, her hair is on fire because she would want me to say to the on camera to the group that the SEL curriculum, the CASEL standards, is a separate entity from the CARES and the Habits of Learning, and they feel that very deeply. It's a guidance curriculum. So Becca, wherever you are.
Good spelling bee land.
So that's CARES.
I know, so I'm supposed to
Shared interventions and extensions. We all have our own rollout for this. I think you've heard enough presentations to understand the three-tiered model of instructional support. Core classroom, then targeted small groups. That's when specialists either push in or pull out in classes for students who need more support. And then, of course, the tier 3 is special education intervention, intensive individual intervention. The only comment I'll make on this slide goes to kind of some of those common expectations that we were referring to earlier. This has been a source of big, like an extended conversation in the SAU throughout the last number of years, specifically with respect to COVID. But the Tier 1 differentiation has been kind of the crux of our conversation. We're working on helping teachers become or allow more differentiation within their Tier 1 instruction, as opposed to automatically jumping into that Tier 2 where you're pulling a student out, or a Tier 3 when you're referring to special education. Good enough?
Work in progress.
Non-program assessments, we just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that, so in addition to the assessments that occur within the classroom, in addition to the QPAs that we're doing, in addition to the assessments that are associated with all the programs that we've just kind of articulated, there are other non-program assessments that kind of float above all that. And obviously, my through lines that you hear me talk about a lot are the SAS scores, the statewide assessments, the NEWAs, but there are a number of other benchmark assessments and screeners specifically around literacy that we use. And SAU 90 does use STAR, I think I mentioned that, along with Northampton. Anything else on screeners? Questions on that?
So NEWA is a state assessment, right?
NEWA is NEWA is something we just adopted. The statewide assessment is the SAS. Yeah. The SAS gives you criterion reference information. Like, I can pull individual standards and see how our entire student body did on a given standard. NEWA, you can do that as well, but it's better. I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's better in terms of looking at student growth, individual student growth.
Yeah.
So it's it's
Sends good information out too.
they're both important.
Yeah, they complement each other, but
Yeah.
they give slightly different information,
Gotcha.
so that the NEWA can really be something that teachers can drill down on a student profile and look at growth across time, whereas the SAS is at the end of the year, so it's at one time. So the NEWA kind of complements that, I think, or whatever the STAR, or however these all kind of complement one another in one way or another.
And I can hear your voice right now about continuity of assessment and using apples to apples data. I hear that. But that's where we are with respect to assessments right now.
It's all the portrait of a learner stuff coming in.
No. Okay, I'll finish up really quickly. Middle school developmental shift. Obviously, middle school is the time when teachers become content area experts. There is a lot less emphasis on program and more emphasis on just getting together with your team, creating units and assessments, collaborating across the SAU, really leveraging those QPAs. A point that I want to make is all the while throughout this entire slideshow, students have been engaged in competency-based education. The CBE, the competencies have been defined. We just use programs as a method to support that, okay? I don't want that lost in the shuffle. And then when it kind of transition, we've got one slide for the high school. Laura's been waiting all night.
So easy.
I'll start just by saying Winnicott does use diagnostics in terms of like just tests. We have the SAT, which we use and we can report on publicly just like we would use for the SAS. And we have the SAS Science as a best benchmark assessment for Winnicott. But that's not the real juicy data, and I'll let Lauren kind of talk through some of the transition and some of the juicy data that we have for success in high school.
Yeah. So your questions earlier kind of very applicable to me because I'm the one that receives all of these students from all these different schools. And I have to say that working with the curriculum coordinators over the last 3 years, I'm really impressed of how much they are aligning. And being at the high schools, I've only been here since July of 2020, and seeing how much change has already happened every year, there's more and more comfort that regardless of where the student comes from, they're gonna be successful at Winnicott. And a lot of that goes back to the two-way communication, both with really being clear with the guidance counselors and the 8th grade teachers. So like right now we're going through the recommendation process, really what the kids should be recommended for based on certain criteria to make sure that they're most successful, not only their freshman year, but their sophomore year, as sometimes the content changes. And then also sending that data back, both for try 1 grades, try 2 grades. The teachers are looking at it, where are the kids being successful based on where I place them. And I think across all of the content levels, it's for lack of a better phrase, it's getting cleaner and cleaner every single year, and I think there's consistent success being shown with the kids, really regardless of where they're coming from. And obviously COVID threw a wrench into all of that a little bit, but the teachers are adapting with it, as are the students, and I think the growth in being able to meet all of the students, both when they come to Winnicott and across all of the schools preparing them, I applaud the K-8 because working with them, they're making my life easier and easier every year. We do have, Dave mentioned the NGSS, we are doing that here at the high school starting sort of this year starting, going into next year. So eventually that will be 3 through 12. We do have various transition programs, as many of you are aware about, to help the kids come in as they blend together both socially and academically with freshman seminar and the recommendation process for math and world language. There are confirmation assessments to really make sure students are going to be successful wherever they go. And Dave, what am I missing? Highlights wise.
SAU 90?
SAU 90. So working a lot with them in terms of shared professional development, and their teachers have been coming over and talking with our teachers. So back at the last PD day, the English teachers from both SAU 21 and SAU 90 got together to have a great conversation about what are the high school English teachers seeing that SAU 90 needs to hear about. Because being in SAU 21, we can all talk, but obviously that's a different part with 90. So they've been great with collaborating this year. I know a few other departments are going to do it as well this year to really make sure that that population and ours is just a seamless transition together as they come in. We still have CETA Summit, and again, we have Title I and the Bridges and the Freshman Seminar, all the supports as kids come in, along with Fresh Start, so that they get acclimated with each other.
Okay. The only thing I would add there is the need for additional and continual program reviews. That was really, really helpful for us, as well as I hope for the people that read it, for you guys. We did a math program review, and we published a world language program review, but it got lost in COVID, frankly. But that is that diagnostic, that churn of data that helps us make better decisions for the students. I think that's an area of growth and an area of need that we need to push forward. So I'll just end with, look, we have areas where we need to push. I'll say areas for growth. I think Tony put his finger on one: evaluation, making sure that teachers are evaluated consistently across the SAU. You're going to hear that in my reports and in our reports throughout the course of the next year or two. Science integration, grades 3 through 5, is a big deal for us. And then tiered instructional support, that triangle. You're going to hear a lot more about that because it's so important. And of course, the continuity of non-program assessments and apples-to-apples data. Being able to provide a dashboard of data for a student in all of our schools, I think would only benefit what we do here. So I'll stop talking because I know you got a long agenda, and happy to address any questions, or individually at the board level we can dig into any of this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Does Power School have the ability to do individual dashboards?
I love that question. We just sent Kyle to a webinar,
Yeah.
and I don't want to overpromise, but we think he can make it happen.
That would be awesome.
Really cool. And I can show my kid exactly what I'm seeing. Thank you all so much. I know that you live and breathe and walk and talk this, but at least for me, this is like a second language. And I know that there's so much in these 10 slides that you're not even telling us, but I think it's really great for us to get a window into this, and really important, so we can support you and understand what we're working for. So thank you. Anyone have any more questions? All right, Mary.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Wonderful to be here with you. Board members from Northampton saw most of this presentation earlier, and so as we promised all of the other boards, we would be sharing it at joint board this evening. So I just wanted to share some information regarding neurodiversity, and also some data that will show you some trends in special education that you may be interested in. So just looking at the definition of neurodiversity and what it means, it's a relatively new term. First appeared in the literature attributed to an Australian social scientist, and it has roots in the social model of what a disability is. And it's useful to see it in terms of other labels that have been used in the past. It links cognitive function to learning and behavior. And it describes people whose brain differences affect exactly how their brain works. That means they have different strengths. That means they have different challenges from people whose brains don't have those differences. And these possible differences could include medical disorders, learning disabilities, other conditions, all of those things that we want to take into consideration. Understanding and appreciating neurodiversity allows us to see how each of us functions differently. Allowing students with differences to learn alongside typical functioning peers helps all learners to embrace differences. It's a great opportunity. So this means that we accommodate atypical needs and supporting the unique strengths of each neurodivergent student, and what it might look like, allowing a student who's neurodiverse the freedom to accomplish tasks in their own way, giving them more time, giving them different tools, everything that we need to do to accommodate them. And educating our students on what neurodiversity is, it's helpful so that all of our students understand what that means. We foster an atmosphere of inclusion and acceptance, very, very important. Another example is providing noise-blocking headphones for a student who finds noise overstimulating. So these are things that you heard before. I just wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Having this critical understanding helps us provide this framework to teach to change how we teach acceptance and how we include students who do learn differently. And this is a great example that I found that just a few decades ago, left-handed students were forced to write with their right hands. And that had long-term impacts. Some of you might remember that. Left-handedness now is considered a difference, not a disorder, and we are accustomed to allowing children to learn to write whatever hand comes naturally to them, and that's a really good thing. So in a similar way, the more strides that we can make to understand and embrace neurodiversity and learning differences, the more we'll help all of our students achieve and learn in ways that promote inclusivity. You may have heard of Temple Grandin. This is one of her newest books on visual thinking, but it was timely because she just wrote a piece in the New York Times in January. Just a little bit about Temple. She's a prominent author and speaker that you may have heard about, especially on the subject of autism and visual thinking. She had no language herself until she was age 4. She was mainstreamed into general education beginning at kindergarten, and she was diagnosed as brain damaged and on the autism spectrum. And what she says is that people who are word-centric and communicate verbally are referred to as neurotypical, while people like herself are referred to as neurodivergent. Society's growing understanding about the different ways that brains work are unquestionably positive developments for many individuals like me, quote attributed to her. Her number one suggestion for improving our schools, K-12, that came out of this article, put more of an emphasis on hands-on classes, arts, music, sewing even, woodworking, cooking, theater, places where our kids can demonstrate their knowledge and their ability in ways other than through just language and communication. There was a study published in 2019 in the Pediatrics Journal that revealed 17% of children aged 3 to 17 had a developmental disability, and you can see those categories at the bottom of this slide. More importantly, the percentage increased over the 2 time periods that were compared in the study. So 2009 to 2011, and then 2015, 2017. So it's very interesting to see that is increasing. And here's some of the main findings. 1 in 6 children in age 3 to 17 were diagnosed with a developmental disability. Boys are more likely than girls. Non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic black were more likely than Hispanic or non-Hispanic of other races. And children living in rural areas are more likely than those living in urban areas. And children with public health insurance were more likely than those uninsured children or those with private insurance. And there's a hyperlink here in your presentation to the study if you're interested in seeing more about that. The IDEA Act was first established in 1975, so it goes back a ways. And what that act did is, and this is the start of special education nationally, it guarantees a free and appropriate public school education for disabled students who qualify and who need those supports in school. And in 2021, the U.S. Department of Education reported 7.2 million students with disabilities were served, or roughly 15% at that time. From 10 years earlier, that's an increase of from 13%. So the number is going up as we see.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about that? How much of that is about enhanced screening?
Well, exactly. And if we go back to the beginning, and I shared this with Northampton when I spoke to them, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I've been around a couple years, and I had the opportunity to be in the very early stages of special education. Actually started in Massachusetts even before the federal act started. And at that time, in the early years of special education, it was very difficult for parents to even want to think about identification in special education, right? You could have this conversation, but it was very difficult to get services in place. That was one end of this pendulum. In the years that have passed since then, the pendulum has swung totally in the opposite direction, where now people see that if they don't have services, that maybe they're missing out on something. So we got to bring that pendulum back toward the middle and make sure that we're not doing things like over-identifying. So we have to be sure that the training that we're offering our teams and helping our parents and doing more workshopping with families so that they understand. Many, many children require and need these services, and we are all much better off as a result, but we don't want to get into that range of over-identifying. Certain aspects of special education, and I'm going to go through the categories in a minute, but things like autism and the work of people like Temple Grandin, that didn't even exist in my vocabulary when I started in special education. We didn't really know, and then it started with Asperger's, and then we moved into the autism spectrum. So those numbers are rapidly increasing because it's rather new. And it doesn't mean that those children didn't exist or have those difficulties. We just didn't know what to call it. And so it wasn't being coded as such.
Thank you.
In addition, this report shows the percentage of the distribution of students by disability type, and this is what I was referring to. I think you'll be interested in this, and I'll show you that in a later slide. A little bit just about the difference between IEPs and 504s, because this is confused quite a bit, and we need to clarify that. The IEP, which is Individualized Education Program, lots of times we say Individualized Education Plan, it's really program, is governed by the special education laws, and the thing that's unique about the IEP is that it requires specialized instruction from qualified educators and related service providers. That's the key to remember, is that in order to find, services are required, we must say that specialized instruction is needed. The 504 plan gets its name from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's a broad civil rights law, and it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in any agency, school, or institution receiving federal funds. The plan is for students with disabilities who do not require specialized instruction. As soon as we cross over that line, that specialized instruction with someone with those credentials is required, then we're into IEP land there. And so typically we can do services and accommodations for a 504 in the general education setting. So that's a good way. And there's a short video that really helps to understand the difference if you're interested in looking at it, that topic a little further. And a little more about specially designed instruction. It means that we adapt as appropriate to the needs of the child regarding several things: content, the methods that we're using, and or the delivery of instruction to address the unique needs that the child has from the disability. And what we're trying to do here is ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. That's really important, so he or she can meet the educational standards adopted by the state. So that's an important piece to learn. Okay, so a look at the data, and you can see the New Hampshire trends here. So it's an inverse relationship. Enrollment in public school in New Hampshire, you can see from 2001 to 2021 is a decline. And if you look on the right side of the screen, you can see that the percentage of students with disabilities in New Hampshire is the inverse, right? We're going up, rather remarkable. And if we look at our total SAU population, similar relationship. On the left-hand side, our enrollment is going down, matching what's happening across the state, while the percentage of students with disabilities is going up.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is there a relationship to maybe what's happening nationally too? If you go back to the state slide, is that consistent with national or?
It is. It is. That was the slide I showed you before, that it went from 13% to 15%. So we're a little higher than the national average here. Massachusetts is even higher than New Hampshire. So we're a little higher there than the national average, but it's same keeping. Mary?
I would just add, I think the 2021 enrollment numbers are a little lower than we would have projected because of COVID, and some families chose to homeschool. But I think in part what that tells us is that families who had students with disabilities chose primarily to keep those students in public school because they needed the supports and services, whereas other families whose students maybe didn't need that level of service were better able to keep their children at home. Side note.
And this is that slide I wanted to show you, looking at our own SAU 21 primary disability by category. And this was as of December. So this is a fluid number. We have new children who identify almost every day, and students who exit our schools. So at the snapshot when this was taken in December, this is where we're at. So the highest amount, specific learning disability, and I'll show you in a minute that this trend is very on point and matching where we are nationally as well, with the exception of other health impairment. A little high for us here. It's sort of a catch-all where we might be going to a little too often. So the directors and I have been discussing this and looking more critically at the disability categories and making sure that we're identifying them in the right place. And this is what we were talking about here. This is the special education disability categories across the U.S. for 2022. So you can see it mirrors very, very similar.
Mary, do you have any numbers of, when you look at the SAU 21 and the 437 roughly kids that are identified as such, do you know the percentages based on the schools?
I do, but I didn't bring that with me tonight. But I can certainly get that information to you. We have that information.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly. And it varies, roughly about the average, to a little bit below, and we have at least one school that's a little bit above, up at closer to 20%. So looking at the trends in special education, one of the most important trends in the last few years has been our efforts to push services into the general education classroom. We learned over the years that pulling kids out for long periods of time was not really doing them any favors. So we see now that students who spend most of their time in regular education classes is now up to 66% of them, and that's up from 31.7% in 1989. When I first started, it was all about remediate and return. We pulled them all out to resource room, and then you return them. And the problem with that is that they didn't have enough exposure to typical peers. They weren't being challenged at the rates that they needed to be challenged at. And so this trend with inclusion and inclusivity has been very, very impactful. And I think that's what Temple Grandin would tell you also in the books that she has written and in her own life experience and what happened to her as a child. In the disability categories, some of them, specific learning disability, things like dyslexia and language-based disabilities, have decreased slightly from almost 37% to just under 33%, while the percentage, and this is what we were talking about, students with disabilities of autism almost doubled, 6.5% to 11.5% in that same time period. So again, that's more education, more research. We know more about that particular area of disability. The federal funding support is a very interesting thing to consider In 2018, the federal government earmarked $12.3 billion for the education of children ages 3 to 12 with disabilities. I didn't fix that typo, and I said I was going to. It's 3 to 21, my apologies. About 15% of the excess cost of educating students with disabilities, compared with the cost of educating a general education student. In 1975, in that act, they set a goal to pay states up to 40% of the excess cost, and that has not been reached. You know, still they're paying about 15%, so they haven't met their goal of trying to, you know, reimburse the states for all of the extra funding. There's also a shrinking pool of qualified staff, and this is something that's really important to all of us. The most recent U.S. Department of Education statistics show the teacher-student ratio for special education is steadily rising, and it did rise from 2006 to 2016. And the current rate of 17 to 1 in some places and some states is actually higher than overall student-teacher ratio in general education. So something's wrong with that picture. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find qualified staff. When we look at our universities and the number of students who are choosing to a major in education and then think about a specialized degree to have qualifications and licensure in special education, it's more and more difficult to find those folks. So we are very fortunate in our SAU to have such a wonderful pool of qualified staff, and we need to continue to recruit and retain the best specialists that we can, not only our teachers, our special education teachers, but as well our related service providers. It's getting more difficult to find speech and language pathologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, the folks who we need day in and day out to offer those services. That's how our children with disabilities access the curriculum, by having those critical therapies available to them in school when they need it. And then another really interesting development has been assistive technology. It's become very common. We have e-readers. Technology's come such a long way. Instead of having a traditional book, or advanced as a computer that can respond to eye movements of a student as commands. So students who don't have use of their limbs can even just use eye movements in order to communicate and get those computers to work. So we're very fortunate to have lots of those augmentative and assistive devices in our schools.
Mary, do you mind if I speak on the funding?
Please go right ahead.
For one,
I was trying to help you out a little bit there, but go ahead.
Just to touch on that federal funding support, so that really is a definition of an unfunded mandate when the federal government is only, you know, paying us 15% when they promised 40%. So, like in 2020, that represented $23.6 billion gap that was not provided to states nationwide.
Oh.
In New Hampshire, that was $92.2 million that should have been supplied to the state of New Hampshire. So when you're looking at a state with declining enrollment, yet an increase in special education enrollment or identification, and then you get a corresponding price per pupil that is much higher, because then that percentage of students that you are enrolling is a higher percentage of identified students, whereas you're seeing a segment of the population going to private schools or homeschooled. It really creates a situation where it makes public education look bad, right? It looks very expensive, but it's an artificial mechanism, in large part due to our funding mechanism of special education. It's obviously something we need to do, and it's great services for our students, but it's very difficult to convey that message to taxpayers, and they wonder, why is special education costing so much? Well, part of it is because we're not getting funded by the federal government that we were promised, and part of it's that dynamic of decreased enrollment and increased identification, and then you layer that on top of New Hampshire's funding mechanism, which is locally based, where it's not funded via the state, it's funded at local property taxes, and our residents are in effect seeing that increase directly affect
affect their tax bill just creates a very difficult situation. It's a challenge when we're looking to budget and fund these very important programs. So I just wanted to point out that special education is really, when you're looking at the cost per pupil and the cost and our budgets increasing, it's in large part due to the lack of funding at the federal government, combined with the lack of state funding in our state specifically. So, sorry, please continue.
No, that's exactly right. Thank you so much for that. So another trend that we need to really concentrate on and work on is the lack of access to mental health care. Nearly 1 in 5 children diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and only 20% of those receive care from a specialized care provider for mental health. And we have barriers to pediatric mental health specialty care, and they include parents who may be reluctant to seek that professional help. The cost of it could be prohibitive. There are certainly not enough mental health providers to meet the demand. We know that. There's a lack of access to specialized providers, and there's very long waiting lists. And we see this every day in our work. A lack of insurance coverage could be another barrier. And so there's a link to the survey there regarding this information if you want to look at that. A little more from this survey. It's a very interesting survey to look at interactively, because you can click on any state that you want to get the specific information from this survey. So for New Hampshire, 30.3% of New Hampshire children aged 3 to 17 have one or more emotional, behavioral, or developmental conditions. And of those, only half received the mental health treatment or counseling within the last year. Many of the children do not have a mental health provider that's accessible, or they're put on exceptionally long wait lists. This is all New Hampshire on this slide. Specialized care providers for mental health include a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a child psychologist, a behavioral therapist, and again, there's the link to the survey so that you can look more if you're interested more in New Hampshire. There's more data, or if you're interested in looking at any other state as well. Now, not all bad news. There's a very promising approach to increasing behavioral health support that we recently heard about. It started in 2018. The New Hampshire Department of Public Health Services received a 5-year pediatric mental health care access grant. And in 2019, they contracted with UNH so that they could create the New Hampshire Mental Health Care Access in Pediatrics program to increase behavioral health integration. That program developed what's called the ECHO Project, Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. And the real core of this project is to make available telehealth consults so that providers can talk to one another remotely. So a big takeaway from COVID, right, is that we learned that we don't all have to be in the same room. So doing this, having teleconsults, even having therapy provided in this remote way makes access a lot better for everybody. They also developed and distributed a referral directory of New Hampshire pediatric mental health services and supports, and that's to be updated annually. So the real good news is that for 2023, they plan to include schools in the ECHO project in the teleconsult model. This is their next step, taking this. So in this infographic on the left-hand side, starting again the pyramid that Dave showed, where we get more specialized as we go up the pyramid, is what the ECHO project is doing currently on the left. They're doing some screening, assessment, and initial treatment at a primary care provider, going up to a clinical behavioral provider or healthcare provider. And then the new part, number 3, what they're doing now is the teleconsults with the expert hub. It could include a psychiatrist, a therapist, a care coordinator. Those professionals get together, and then they decide how to refer, to who to refer, and get that specialized treatment and resources out to the family, out to the student. On the right-hand side, starting at the bottom, is what they're projecting. They will add the piece in and start training schools in how to use this model. So starting with the classroom teacher or the folks at the classroom level, screening for social emotional learning, and then moving into our social workers, our counselors, our psychologists, occupational therapists, those school-based behavioral health experts who then can access the teleconsults with this expert hub and then have the same access to referrals and community-based or specialized treatments. So that's all very exciting. It's on the horizon. We're going to be talking to our folks more and more about this. We're very grateful to have the support of our school counselors, our social workers, our board-certified behavioral analysts, BCBAs. We have a couple at Seabrook of RBTs who are behavior technicians. And so all of this is helping, and then our partnerships with Seacoast Mental Health and other agencies that help and come into our schools and help support the mental health needs of our students. We know that it's very, very important that we do this, and kids can't access learning, they can't access the curriculum unless they're feeling good about themselves, and it's really important that we help and we provide all of the support that we can.
I got a question on the telemental health stuff. Has anybody run into issues with like the crossing state lines with the telemental health? Like, perfect example, I was going through PA through in Bedford. COVID hit, couldn't see my mental health provider. They're like, we're gonna go to telemental health. Great, I'll get on the Zoom meeting. A month into it, they were like, oh, by the way, I can't provide for you anymore because you're in New Hampshire, we're in Massachusetts, even though it was a federally backed VA system.
Yeah.
The suggestions I was given was, well, why don't you just drive across the border and you get on your computer in a parking lot in Salisbury, and it just seems that are like the states trying to work with the federal level to be able to access. I mean, if there's a mental health provider in the Midwest that can book people, it's all on a computer to talk with people. I understand that it's nice to see people, but if we're going the mental health route, is that something that's being addressed? Because I think that would give people far more access, because it seems ridiculous that if someone's willing to help you and talk to you, like my therapist, like there's nothing I can do. I was told we can't talk to you, and I know I'm not the only one that's probably gone through stuff like that. And I
think that's a great point, and obviously all of this is bound by the insurance companies and where that's coming from. When we have funding like this that comes from the state level through a grant, it kind of takes up some of that, but it's very New Hampshire bound, this particular grant. And when you accept funding from a particular state, then you're bound by those rules of how they want you to deliver the services. So everything that I've read so far about this program is just within the confines of New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has a very large need because we don't have the concentration of providers here that we may have in some other states. So that's important, but you raise a very, very good point that we should all be thinking about. And because, you know, our towns are very close to the border too, we're gonna run into that, I think. That's very real.
I know it can be very frustrating for people, especially if you like put your hand in the air and you're like, I'd like to get some help, and they have other people, I mean, literally just across the state line that can help out. And I guess if it was a federal grant, it might be a little bit different to open it up, but I guess if we'd have to talk with legislators down the line, and it's a whole way bigger issue.
It's a New Hampshire law. It's a New Hampshire certification law that will not allow telemedicine to cross borders for mental health especially. So it is a New Hampshire thing. It's not every state.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Really,
Welcome.
Thank
really
you.
informative.
Telehealth services at the hospital, for neurology, infectious disease. They dial in, they push a screen into the patient's room.
Okay, given the time, public comment is obviously closed by now, but just thought I would make it official. This is super informative, huh?
Yeah, like just don't touch your mouth.
A lot to chew on. Thank you for making the time.
For Gabby to come in and sneak.
Section 5, action items, policies first read.
So we just have one, which has been brought forward by the policy committee. This is our fixed assets policy. This is a joint board policy specifically. It's just here for review.
Any questions or comments on the policy? No, then I'll take a motion to move it to,
It's just to approve it as a first read.
yep, to approve the first read.
I'll make a motion to approve the following policy of the joint board for a first read, policy F-004.
Okay, all in favor, two hands, is that okay? Excellent. Thank
That's
you.
unanimous. Motion passes.
Suicide prevention plan?
Yeah, so Dr. Toomey will happily speak to this, and one of our social workers, Hallie Westerberg, is here as well.
Great.
Just briefly, this is a requirement under New Hampshire law. This was enacted in 2021, I believe. 2019, okay. So here we are, getting
Right
to the
on time.
document. So I don't know if you want to come up.
Sure, absolutely.
Easier for people at home to hear you. That's my
Sorry about that.
We're recording.
So as you know, we have a policy regarding suicide prevention. And part of that policy is that we also have a suicide prevention plan. And so in my research about this, I discovered that beginnings of a plan was started, and Tally actually was part of that committee that worked on that. So I'm going to let her speak about how that work was started. And we picked up on that and put this draft together that you have that's just more comprehensive, and made sure that there were lots of resources included and updated links and all of the information that our schools will need. And with your approval, we'll be able to disseminate that plan to all of our schools and start some training on it. We're hoping to get a representative group from each of the districts here on March 14th in the morning. It's no school day, voting day, as you know. And so we'd like to do some training in that morning around mental health and also suicide prevention, and this plan will be part of that rollout. So I'll let Tally speak to a little more about how it all started.
Thank you, Mary. So I'm Tally Westerberg. I've been the school social worker here at Winnicott for 22 years. And as Mary said, when our former Director of Student Services was in place, we did gather an SAU-wide sort of mental health team to begin looking at this. It was, I believe, signed by Governor Sununu in August of 2019, but it took a while for things to kind of shake out, especially with COVID, and for some of the Department of Education folks to put forth technical advisories about what was expected and those kinds of things. So I think in the beginning we thought the policy was the plan, but now we know we need a plan and a policy. And so basically what it outlines are things like risk factors, protective factors, warning signs. And the two primary components of the plan now that we've been working on are, number one, that we are required to educate staff. And so every year, annually, staff members are responsible, and the SAU has been administering this to have 2 hours of suicide prevention training specifically, every staff member. And it needs to be evidence-informed or evidence-based. We're very blessed here in our community, especially in our state, because one of the things that has been really helpful is Connors Climb, which is a local organization. They have partnered with a national suicide prevention program that is evidence-based and very well regarded, and they essentially will train our teachers. And they have done that very successfully. It's accessible language, ACT, Acknowledge, Care, Tell, and they use the same language with adults that they do with kids. So that has been really successful. And I guess I would just also like to take a moment to say that the SAU has always been very supportive of mental health of our students, and being able to really focus on having high quality professional development on this topic, and have the support that we need to implement these kinds of programs and plans has been really, really helpful. And so the other component I would say really is, how do we respond to our students who are in some sort of mental health crisis? And so the plan kind of outlines that. We have protocols within the building that are have also been worked on that are more sort of developmentally appropriately tuned to the age of the child in how we respond. And as Mary said, we're responsible for having protocols in place, but also maintaining access and sort of, smoothing the referral process to those resources that we have in the community for our students.
I just have a quick question as a professional, Tally. Do you feel that 2 hours is sufficient a year, or would you like to see more?
I think that, that's a good question. I think that 2 hours is helpful because it sort of sets the common language, and I know, even Dr. Hobbs was talking earlier about common language and common expectations, and I think that having that being provided to our teachers so that they can come to the experts in the building and say, I'm worried about this kid, even if they don't have the words, but like, I see this, and I see this, and I this. I think within the context of all of the other expectations that we have on teachers, 2 hours of plain, clear language and those kinds of things is really helpful. I think that what having this plan formally adopted within the SAU is going to do at this point is really help us to more clearly articulate our protocols and how we actually sort of take care of things, both to staff members and to the families and the communities. Because I think that's, that's the piece where we're still, haven't done as good of a job because we haven't had as much time to communicate. Okay, well, when you, teachers, say, I'm worried about this kid, or you share something that they wrote in their English discussion, or whatever the thing is, I think, they sort of hand it off, trusting our expertise, thankfully, and we sort of take it from there. But I think the ins and outs of all that actually happens. I think having this universally adopted by the SAU will help us to do that better.
Well, I'm thinking maybe it can be incorporated in other, professional development too, once this is in place, then it would be easy to incorporate things
Absolutely.
more times in a year.
It's the 2 hours is a baseline for everybody so that everyone gets that.
Right.
And then what we want to do is build a layer on top of that. That also includes dialogue, so that we're in the same room together, so that we can bring guest speakers in. On March 14th, we're planning to have Seacoast Mental Health come. DCYF is coming. We want some of our students from Winnicott to come. Their voice is critically important to this discussion as well. And then having our own team in place, people, social workers, people who are counselors who are doing this work day in and day out, and just helping to share that information and have a dialogue and take their questions. We hear it from students, we hear it from staff. What's the number one need that you have? Our mental health. So they want to talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I assume correctly that when you say everyone gets the training, that means going beyond sort of the classroom teacher?
Correct.
And including, custodians, part-time, anybody who has access or is interfacing with children?
Exactly. There's a series of mandated trainings that happen annually every year, and everybody is required to complete those trainings.
Including coaches?
And how
Coaches.
does that happen?
It's the same requirement.
It's an online-based
It's all
training.
online.
Yeah. So they can access it, and the schools provide opportunities and time for that to happen.
Thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
We're looking for a motion to approve the plan for adoption.
I make a motion to approve the SAU 21 Suicide Prevention Plan for adoption, and thank you for doing it.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. All in favor? You got it all, Rhonda.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you for the time tonight.
You can scoot out.
Yeah.
Just, Dr. Hobbs, before you scoot out, did you want to comment on these at all?
Well, we bought enough,
You bought too many, so.
extras.
We had, I framed as new teacher mugs, but we got enough for admin team and for joint board.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I mean, I want my name on it, but that's all right. No. Yeah, there we go. We make it go, right? We'll do a painting class.
All right, the SAU 21 proposed calendar. This didn't come about easily, I know.
So some of you may remember a conversation that we had about the calendar being required now to align with Seacoast School of Technology.
as a sending district. And we are one of multiple sending districts to the Seacoast School of Technology. So the superintendents of those sending districts met when we started. I think we counted 28 different days that would not have met the law. The law required us to get to 10. 10 dissimilar days within our collective calendars. So we were able to do that. There's some give and take that happens obviously in that process, and you'll see we have a couple fewer early release days built in next year because those two count against our alignment. So we are at 10 as it stands. I think there's only one, maybe two other boards left to approve this calendar. So our hope is that we will adopt it tonight. We have shared with our associations as required through our collective bargaining agreements, and knock on wood, we will adopt the calendar and move forward in good standing with the state.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, looking for a motion, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the SAU 21 calendar for the 2023-24 school year.
And I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you. All right, the next item is the superintendent evaluation process. I asked to put this on the agenda because of timing and board turnover. It's a little early, typically in our sort of agreed timeline to begin the evaluation for Meredith, but given that a number of seats are up and the next time we'll all meet is March, when we would be about starting it, we'll have a number of new faces that wouldn't have worked with Meredith for the past year plus. So what I'm hoping to do, if you've been through it before, it's all really organized through Rhonda. We send it out online. We ask have you complete a survey and provide feedback, and then I generate that feedback into a report to share with everybody. And Meredith and I discuss the report, or whoever is in my seat next go round discusses the report, and we bring it to everyone, and it helps her sort of adjust her goals and plans for the next year moving forward. So this is really my personal request that everyone is willing to participate in it so that we can get more information from it that I think will only help her staff, and the next boards moving forward, so that we'll look to disseminate that probably next month, if that works for you and Rhonda, if that's feasible. So we'll get it in before the election. So we just ask that you look out for the email and you put a little time into it.
Sounds like a great idea.
Thank you. Yeah, because we don't meet again until the end of March as a joint board, in which case we won't see some of each other again, probably. This will be it. So sad.
So sad.
So sad. All right, that was all for that, short and quick. So thanks, everyone. Deliberative session dates are all provided there. This is just for information. Looks like a really busy week. Monday, February 6th at Seabrook, Tuesday, both Southampton and Northampton, Wednesday, Hampton Falls, and Thursday, Winnicott. Go ahead.
So Matt's coming up just to explain briefly how I think deliberative sessions work and what that process looks like.
That or he's stealing.
Board members.
Hit him with his magic
Not
wand.
everybody, I realize, has been through this process before. It is a little bit of a hokey one.
So yes, so the deliberative sessions are all upcoming in February, and how those work is we each district has a district moderator who runs the meeting. So they will start off the meeting with providing the ground rules to the audience, the community members, and then they'll go through each warrant article one by one. So the entire warrant article will be read, and then typically before the deliberative session begins, we have, I'm sorry, I'll step back one moment. We'll meet with the moderator, and they'll agree to allow me, who is not a resident of each individual town, to speak. So the moderator and the community needs to allow any residents to speak. So the moderator will provide me the opportunity to present on each warrant article, at which point they will open up for public comment. So the residents will have the ability to speak on each warrant article, and they'll also be given the opportunity to make a motion to adjust the warrant article. So for example, the operating budget, there is the ability to either increase or decrease that budget. And then it will go to vote within the meeting. So we'll go through each warrant article one by one. It'll be closed after each warrant article, and then we'll, at the conclusion of the deliberative session, we'll have a budget and associated warrant articles that will go on ballot for the March 14th election.
Which hopefully mimic the ones that we're putting up in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. There is that risk.
So obviously we have our collective bargaining agreement, so that will be, I'm certain that we'll have some audience members for that topic, as well as some, I'm hopeful that we'll have a large audience just to hear about the budget.
How can a resident ask to change what was in that collectively bargained agreement?
So the CBA cannot be adjusted.
Okay.
So there are some,
All those hours lost.
So we will have, so the moderator will kind of regulate what's allowed and what's not. We also have legal counsel to advise if there's any type of motion that's not allowable.
Residents can also add warrant articles, can't they?
So there is that opportunity prior to this point. So I believe I'm not sure the exact date, but we're past that date. Any resident can submit a citizen's petition warrant article.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So we have one citizen's petition article in the SAU, and that's at Seabrook, and they. But otherwise, there are no other citizens petition articles.
We said we didn't want it, but they still did it. So.
What is it?
It was gonna be 2 actually, but we feel like we talked.
So there's an annual warrant article in both Seabrook and Hampton, and that's the Child Benefit Services warrant article, and that's to supplement supplies for the Sacred Heart School, which is a Catholic school here in Hampton.
Okay.
For students that reside in Seabrook or Hampton.
Do that?
So yeah, it's the private
Didn't know
school,
that.
they always petition it so that the taxpayers can help pay for stuff.
Does it pass?
Every year.
Just about last
In
year was
Hampton
the
it
first
does.
year that we came, that Seabrook came through with
Yeah, but they also voted down literally
everything, except for like Meals on
Yeah.
Wheels.
If we have to sacrifice it this year to get other things to
Yeah.
pass, we'll do it.
What was
Voters
that
on
one?
the
But
side.
it's not recommended.
That
by
didn't
us.
get brought forth, but that was for a scholarship.
Yeah, that was.
Okay.
No.
Any questions on deliberative session process? Is this when I should mention this thing? This little paper that we passed around?
Oh, I'll certainly can, but we can address it during the finance report.
Say you'll do it in the finance. Oh, that works too. Now that everybody's looking at it.
He's gonna do it.
They mailed this out, or is it just the home kids out?
We might, yeah.
Can't mail.
So what you're looking at right now is a newsletter that Hampton Falls School Board has put together. They kindly shared their kind of template for this flyer. As you all are aware, in our individual school board meetings, I believe all the boards agreed to send a flyer out to inform our voters about the CBA, provide some factual information. So this is Hampton Falls newsletter that's addressing the CBA, and we want to provide that for you all as you're developing your flyer to your respective voters.
We haven't yet decided how we're gonna disseminate it. It cannot go through the students. we do have an agreement with the town that we can send newsletters. We do seasonal newsletters, and we send them to the town administrator, and they distribute it on their email list, and we distribute it through the school's email list. So we try and capture as much of the community as possible. We have done mailings in the past. This may elevate to the level of mailing importance. I don't think we've even talked about it in our board, so they're probably surprised to see this. I just finished it last night. So.
Do you have a digital version that you
Sure.
would be willing
Yeah,
to
I can share that.
We could then
Yeah, that'd be
edit
great.
and
We do ours as a mailing.
Yeah. We stopped a few years ago when the town agreed to finally use our words in our newsletters and not their words. It was a nice change.
something like this, would it be okay to share it on social media? I know that sounds so 2022, but wait, 23, sorry. But is that something, everything that's on here is public information?
I mean, I think it'd be appropriate to post. I think you just need to be careful about commenting thereafter and having that dialogue. That's where you get into the problem. But
One person from the board said it, and no one from the board commented on it.
So this is a good template for the boards, and I'd be happy to work with any of the boards that may need some help with developing their own. It should be.
Yeah, much of the left side is Matt's language from the website anyway, and I just culled it a little bit to fit it.
Is it something that can go on like our Channel 22 and those kind of things? Because it's not school, it's town. Is that possible?
I think you'd have to talk with your local cable access channel about whether or not they post election-related information. I don't know if they do. They have to post for anyone who requests that access.
Okay.
So I can't answer that for you.
That's right, exactly. When do they start again? Yeah.
It's dependent.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Upon the town. It's dependent upon the town. We
Okay.
have submitted videos in the past. Some towns have accepted it and aired it, and some towns have not. If any of the boards decide to do the mailer route, we can, we could utilize a third-party vendor to send them out to residents, and then we do have a marketing account that we charge back to. So.
Well, what were you saying? Winnicott's not gonna have to if everybody else does it, right? Because they'll hit all of the towns.
Well, it's the same towns, yes.
Right? Except Hampton, yeah, we'd have to do Hampton. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Go, go, go.
What about those 18-year-olds in the high school we're all gonna vote?
Oh, yeah, we gotta get them in.
Them.
Yeah.
So again, you can't send it out through the students, but you can do direct mails to your registered voters in your community. And there, as Matt says, there are agencies you can contract with to support you with that.
Awesome.
And we can talk to our town halls about some sort of, even if it's not distribution, of having it available.
Certainly, yes.
And if you have a budget committee in your town, I mean, that was a nice point that you had on the website, that your budget committees would have known about this and approved it. So that's a nice connection. We don't have a budget committee. But I think that that's a nice way to show the sort of town-school connection, support.
Yeah, I mean, definitely check with your town. Like, there are restrictions on voting day itself, right? You can't have information within a certain distance, within a certain amount of time, but they can guide you around where information can be shared in advance.
Okay.
And timing is also a consideration. So typically leading up to the election, closer to the election, might be better. Now we put out the video now to kind of get the word out, but we're going to continue to, I mean, everyone needs a mechanism to fall asleep, so.
I did nominate that for Calm.
Yeah.
Sleep Stories by Matt
That's
Yeah,
I love it. There we go. But the other thing too is though, we do want it out beforehand too though, because we've got so many absentee voters, you know what I mean? Now there's so many that do that a lot, so it's kind of like, almost like a,
It is that delicate
balancing
balance,
act.
Yep.
knowing exactly when. You put it out too early, they don't care.
Right,
Put
they
it out
just
too
throw it.
soon, they've already
If they're
voted.
truly absentee, they're not gonna get a mailer anyway.
right, but how many are not?
It's not that.
Yeah.
Snow.
We've had, we've had a lot in past years, and we've had snowy elections. We've had people starting to adopt early
Yes.
voting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great, so yes, I will, Rhonda, if I may ask, can I send you the electronic copy to distribute to everyone? So, thank you very much. Great, thank you. Election filing information.
So I shared this information at each individual board meeting this month, but the filing period opens tomorrow in each of our communities for school board positions and school district offices. So note that. Jill asked me also just to share how the process works. So our next joint board meeting will be when new people are seated. So at that time, right, we elect a new chair of the joint board, which will be from Northampton. This time,
She'll be great.
Danielle's like, what did I just get?
Reading policy, she's peeking at a policy and she doesn't know that it's a new job.
But I heard about the sleeping.
Yeah.
The next chair.
She's already hooked up to the computer. Yeah.
and the same will happen. Each of your March meetings will be your organizational meeting. Each meeting following the election will be your organizational meeting. And I think a couple of you, that will be April because of the timing of your meetings.
We actually have all the meetings.
They all moved, okay.
Moved because of the election, because it's the second Tuesday, it's
Right.
late this time, because of the calendar.
Right,
falls.
thank you.
So, everybody needs to.
Barring weather.
Yes. So then in order to allow for everybody after the election to be sworn in and participate, all of the meetings, like Northampton and Southampton, the no meetings happening prior to the election. We do have an OC meeting happening prior, so they can at least set the agenda for the end of March, because you have to wait for reorganization to know who your OC members are, which is just a whole snowball effect. So the OC will meet prior, Southampton and Northampton meet prior, and then Seabrook,
So the OC will still,
The current
as we
OC
are, will set the agenda for the next.
for the March meeting.
Got it,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and then the rest of them, there will be no meetings, I don't think, the week of the election. And then the following week is when we'll have Seabrook, because everybody will have to be sworn in.
Right.
by then.
So it is also your chance to jump ship if there are any committees you hate. And find new ones to be on.
Did that.
Say, look at you, this is a perfect committee for you.
That's right. But I think it's a bit of a confusing process if you haven't been through it. I mean, if you entered it new, it just made sense, but being on the other side, it feels weird and it's a little confusing to understand the timing of everything. Thanks.
Sure.
Any questions? Okay. Upcoming NHSBA training dates?
Yeah, so again, we included this in your packet, largely as informational, but you'll note there are 2 trainings for new school board members. Last year, the OC decided that it made sense to have the School Board Association come to us for that first March meeting. It had been, trainings had been online during COVID for a couple of years, so I think people felt there was a bit of a gap. So that's certainly a decision that can be made again this year, but if not, at the very least, there is an opportunity for some online training for new board members, which gives, I think, a helpful overview of the role and responsibilities and how school district governance works.
And even if you've been existing members, sometimes there's always new information to get out of that, so.
You're very helpful.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Finance report.
Thank you. So speaking of sleep aids, I have included both the fiscal year-to-date expenditure and revenue reports for the SAU in board docs. So on the revenue side, we are tracking normally. We have the typical district assessments included, but there are a few accounts I do want to draw your attention to. The first is actually banking interest. So you'll see there's a surplus revenue of approximately $3,800, and this is due to the numerous rate hikes this year. And I do anticipate that we will have additional accrual of interest over the remaining 5 months of the fiscal year, although at a lower pace because we'll have a smaller balance. Additionally, we have received 2 payments. It's actually, you'll see there's 2 accounts, one for $2,000 in the other local revenue account, and another for $3,900 in the energy rebates account. And both of these accounts represent the revenue that we're receiving through monetizing our tax credits for that sustainable energy. As you recall, we talked about this last, I think in the spring. So that's via the hydroelectric power third party that we're utilizing for those tax credits, since we don't have sustainable energy on site here in our schools. Now I will note that's for all of our districts except I think Northampton, because Northampton is Eversource. So that's showing up in the SAU revenue report. However, it's being split out across the district. It will be distributed back to the districts based on the allocation at the end of the fiscal year. So it's really not going to hit the SAU revenue report. It's going to hit except for our portion, which is tiny in the SAU office. It'll be reflected in your revenue reports fiscal year end. And then finally, on the revenue side, you'll see there's $2,900 in excess other state aid, and that represents the New Hampshire Retirement System refund for the SAU office's employer contribution. So on the expenditure side, we have you'll see a current balance of $178,000. So that's not truly a balance of $178 because if you recall, when we passed the SAU budget last year, we under budgeted actually by $78,000 by utilizing unreserved fund balance. So in reality, we have $100,000 in available balance. That is higher than normal, and that's because we are recognizing some savings in our salary and benefits accounts because if you recall, we consolidated the database and systems administrator positions into a single position, so we are saving on that from that one position. On the flip side, we do have a number of months remaining in this fiscal year, so there's 5 months for any accounts that have not been fully encumbered. Additionally, we do have a couple of accounts that are over budget. That includes $5,100 in improvement of instruction, other expenses. That represents excess fingerprinting costs.
Sorry.
Finger painting.
So not only is there
I mean, it's a lot of finger paint. And we do enjoy it.
It's probably, wow.
It would,
so that's
it
for the
would be a
background
morale.
checks. I kind of missed what everyone was laughing about. But, I'll proceed.
Siri heard it.
So, in addition to the labor burden on our staff, we also have that monetary cost, which is really a result of our labor market currently. We've just had a much larger than normal rate of turnover with staff, so that just means more background checks as we're churning through employees, particularly when you're looking at the positions like substitute teaching, where we have a lot of applicants, and then it doesn't necessarily translate into actual substitute teachers.
Matt, question.
Yes.
I fess up, I'm the one who made the joke about finger painting, but that's why they were laughing. But my question is, that's a big difference. I mean, is it really doubling or more of the number of fingerprints that we have to do?
Well, I think the other
Background check.
component of it is that we likely didn't normalize to post-pandemic levels. I think we probably saw a decrease. We definitely saw a decrease, but we didn't make the corresponding increase when we budgeted last year.
Okay.
Right, because we weren't fingerprinting people or finger painting people because we weren't, you know, we weren't in person, or it was a unique or it was a
Yeah.
lesser degree.
Yeah,
So,
okay, that makes sense, yeah.
good question. So another area that we were over budget on were repair and maintenance, supplies, and dues and fees, and these were all reflect areas where we have seen some cost escalation due to the rate of inflation. So that is for this current fiscal year 23. Moving on to fiscal year 24, so next year's proposed budget, we have completed that budget development process with all of our school boards, so thank you very much, as well as our budget committees. And we did hold all of our budget public hearings between January 9th and 16th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day or Civil Rights Day. So that has been completed, and as we discussed earlier, the next step in the process is the deliberative sessions in February. So I will note that all of you, the school boards, did bring forth some pretty lean budgets, and really took care to limit the number of warrant articles that we brought forth to the public, and this is really due to two components. One was the current financial climate, but also it was intended to best position the SAU to pass the proposed collective bargaining agreement, or the CBA, for our teachers' contract. So I just want to note again publicly that we did put together a video that does provide information on the CBA, and it summarizes the teacher compensation, the contract language adjustments, as well as the rationale from the school administration and school boards. The video has been posted on the SAU website as well as each of our schools' websites, and it's also been posted on social media. So that will be warrant article number 2 on all of the ballots that will be voted on the Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 election. I'll also note that it was unanimously recommended by all of our school districts' school boards, and is recommended by all of our respective towns' budget committees. And the budget committees their responsibility is the fiscal oversight and the review of those town and school warrant articles. So that was significant that we received that support from our budget committees, as it shows that the collective bargaining agreement is fiscally responsible and fair, that we're bringing forth to our voters. Just a couple notes on the CBA. It is a cooperative agreement at the SAU 21, so that means that it needs to pass in all 5 school districts within the SAU in order for it to take effect in any one of our districts. So if one district, if the CBA fails in any one district, it fails for all of our districts. So that creates a challenge for passing the CBA. Additionally, if the CBA fails, teachers receive no pay increase and no steps. So that perpetuates a compensation differential with some of our surrounding SAUs. We really do need competitive compensation in order to better retain our amazing teachers. We also need that compensation in order to attract high quality new teachers. So if that contract fails, we are concerned that we will lose those valuable teachers, and we would likely lose them to those neighboring SAUs that do offer better compensation and better benefits. Finally, I just want to note that our teachers are amazing. They truly are. They're in the classroom every day. They're working with our students, providing instructional, personalized instruction, individualized learning. They provide hands-on opportunities and educational experiences. Our teachers really excel at providing instruction to all of our students at their personal level. So whether it's challenging our advanced students or providing support and intervention for our struggling students, they are there. And they do that for on both academic level as well as the social emotional level. So we truly are fortunate to have tremendous faculty that are employed at SAU 21, because really it's our teachers who make our schools great. So I just want to encourage all of our member town residents to vote on Tuesday, March 14th. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Okay. We will discuss personnel in non-public. Future meetings, the OC, Tuesday, March 7th. Voting day again, March 14th. Joint board, next meeting is March 28th. And just a reminder, we have the legislative session planned for next, is it Tuesday, the 31st. So hopefully you can attend. Please do let Rhonda know if you are attending specifically, because if you have a majority of your board present, it becomes a meeting for your board.
And just an update that policy committee was originally scheduled for yesterday, but that has been rescheduled for also the 31st at 5:15.
Okay, thank you.
Is that meeting on the 31st, is it going to be virtual at all or broadcast?
I don't think it ever has.
Is it at 6?
6:30 to 8.
6:30.
Usually there's food, that helps.
It would
here,
very much help, but I won't be here. I was afraid I'd mentioned it, but it was really good last year when we had it.
Yeah.
We will likely have another one later in the legislative session, but this is a good opportunity early on in the process to
Yeah.
come together.
Will any senators be there like last time? Or
So we've invited all of our legislative representatives. I think we have a handful who have said they're coming at this stage.
Every legislator representing all of our districts has been invited.
There are almost as many of them as there are of you.
Excellent.
So if you know your legislators, kind of nudge them and say, hey, looking forward to seeing you Tuesday night.
no pressure?
Okay, I would like a motion to enter into non-public, please.
I'll make a motion to enter non-public at 7:53.
Thank you.
Just to note, it's under RSA 91A 3(2) A
Yes.
and B.
That.
That.
I was like, what time is it? I was so concerned.
I'll second.